Welcome to NVC Life. I'm Rachelle Lamb, veteran NVC trainer and relationship coach, helping listeners navigate interpersonal conflict and ground more deeply into relational living. Greetings, fellow humans. In today's episode, I would like to explore the work of Drs. John and Julie Gottman, who are the founders of the Gottman Institute and the Gottman Method. And many people have probably heard of them, are familiar with their work. They have been working in the field of relationships and in particular marriages for decades now. And I find their work to be very sound and useful. Super supportive to people who are in committed relationships. And one of the things that they would do in their research is to place a couple in a room together and videotape them and pay attention to what it is that the people were doing with each other. There would either be indicators of them being able to navigate conflict effectively or getting in the way and essentially being destructive to the relationship. So they came up with the term of the masters and the disasters in the relationship realm. And so in studying the masters, they could come up with tools that would be helpful for people who were not so skillful and support them in shifting from being the disaster to the master. So I think this is very useful. And they have a term called the Four Horsemen. Typically, we hear that term in the context of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But here we're talking about the four horsemen and their disastrous effect on relationships. And I thought I would look at these and see how they overlap with the four ways of alienating communication and nonviolent communication, because there is an overlap. And in nonviolent communication, when we talk about the 4 Ds of disconnection, which are essentially to diagnose, to make demands, to deny personal responsibility, and to think in terms of deserve thinking, whether it's punishment or reward. I think it's important to recognize that people do often come up with their formulas. So we've got the 4 Ds of disconnection in the NVC process, and we have the 4 horsemen in the Gottman Method. To me, it's important to recognize that there are more than 4 ways to disconnect. There is a multitude of ways, but these are very handy because our memory can only retain so much. And so to have these 4 Ds of disconnection, the 4 horsemen, can be pretty handy. So the first one of the 4 horsemen is criticism. And this is very well defined in the NVC method, which would be the diagnosis. So the first steps here, or the first signs, the first indicators of problems in relationships are very well aligned in this particular case. A diagnosis, telling another person what you think they are, using language that judges or pigeonholes, is well aligned with criticism. And so whenever we use these, diagnosis and criticism, our partner is not going to be friendly towards us. They're usually going to become very defensive, which is also one of the 4 horsemen. Now, defensiveness is not mentioned in the nonviolent communication. However, it's clear that whenever we use a diagnosis or we place demands or deny personal responsibility or use deserve thinking, that there will be defensiveness. So I find it very useful that Gottman has identified this particular strategy, if you will, or way of responding that is very typical, I would say, for all human beings, to want to defend themselves if they feel afraid or perceive a threat, whether it's a real or imagined threat. The thought that something is threatening to you will, in many cases, generate a response of defensiveness. So really good to track that. Just wonder, am I being defensive? Is the person I'm speaking with being defensive? I mean, these are things we can typically pick up. Even someone explaining themselves is a kind of defensiveness. And so just to pay attention to that. because this can be quite destructive. Another one that Gottman speaks about is contempt. Oh, that's a very powerful one. This is the way you might look at your partner, sneer, roll your eyes. There's a certain movement of the upper lip in the corner, evidently, that can be seen in videos when people are showing contempt or feeling contempt towards someone else. And I would say that the way that this ties in with NVC is deserved thinking. There's this idea when you have contempt for someone that they don't deserve your humanity. That's one way I would look at it, or they don't deserve to be treated humanely. Really useful to track that. Am I showing contempt? And we can be doing this without even having much awareness of it. Underneath the contempt, if we explore it from an NVC perspective of needs not being met, I would hazard to guess that one doesn't feel understood. They don't feel fully seen and heard. And so as a result, one of the strategies, instead of being honest about what's going on, is to become hardened and to treat the other person poorly, as a less than deserving. And so that would be one way of looking at contempt and seeing the overlap with the NVC. And the fourth horseman is stonewalling. That would be, it could be stonewalling, ghosting. We disengage from the other person. I would say that while stonewalling isn't represented in any of the 4 NVC Ds of disconnection, it certainly would be symptomatic of one or more of the 4 Ds of disconnection being operational. I would put it that way. So what is happening when we're disengaging? I think this comes back to defensiveness. I do think it's a strategy to protect oneself. Rather than engage, I remove myself from the environment because I don't trust that either I or the other person or others in the environment will be able to support a productive outcome. That would be typically why we would engage in disengagement. Okay, let's do a recap of what disconnects according to the NVC process and what disconnects according to the Gottman Method. So the 4 Ds of disconnection from the NVC: understanding, diagnosing another person, making demands of others, denying our personal responsibility, and thinking in terms of deserve, punishment, and reward. The 4 horsemen that are destructive to relationships, according to the Gottman Method: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So can you see how these two together, these 2 approaches, can really help you troubleshoot your relationship? You can look at yourself, you can look at your partner kindly, I would suggest. See how the 2 of you are interacting when you are in a place of feeling some strain in the relationship. How do you speak to each other about it? Are you able to say something like, hey, I noticed that we're doing the following. I noticed that we're using language that is criticism. I noticed that we're defending ourselves. Defenses is so widely used. It's so common. That could be an easy entry point into a deepening conversation. I notice we're both getting defensive as we're speaking to each other. Let's just take a break for a moment so we can hit the reset button and see if we can discuss this in a way that's more productive for both of us. What do you say? Just little things like that can have enormous impact and start to change the direction of the conversation that you're having. Have a look at the Gottman Method and see if you can find the areas in which that can help you fine-tune your NVC practice. I will include a description in the show notes of the 4 Ds of disconnection according to the NVC process, as well as the 4 horsemen according to the Gottman process. use this as a way to watch yourself, to observe yourself in action, and also to reflect after you've had an exchange that has been challenging, seeing which one of these particular mechanisms, and there are probably more than one, that you were employing while you were talking with your partner or someone else important in your life. I hope you find this as useful as I find it in my own life. Thank you for tuning into NVC Life. For future episodes, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. For free resources or to book a private session with me, head over to RachelleLamb.com. Until the next time, stay sane, grateful, and generous.